episode of the Actionables podcast. My guest for today is somebody who started off as a corporate colleague but is now a peer and a friend. Today I'm sitting down with the inspired Hariprasad Varma. Hari is a leadership coach, he is a dialogue facilitator, and he's also a trauma therapist. His journey has been one of rediscovering and reimagining what it means to live a life that creates a context for deep personal fulfillment. He's the founder of Sensei Leadership that helps to design customized leadership journeys for organizations. He's also the founder of Yoga Shala that helps focus on trauma healing through somatic and yoga practices. And he also helps curate holistic wellness retreats for individuals and groups across India as well as abroad. He specializes in creating deeply self-reflective explorations through experiential and embodied practices anchored in ideas such as arts, music, and theater, contextualizing it in lived experience of the individual and the organization. This enables participants to come up with original and personal leadership narratives for themselves. One of his core area of practice is working with Indian epic traditions of Mahabharata and Ramayana in self-discovery and leadership contexts. And I'm very excited to deep dive into today's conversation because we're going to be talking about archetypes and we're going to be talking a lot about how this can shape your leadership journey. So let's get into it. Hi, Hari.
Hello. Hi, Paden.
Hi, thank you for being here, Hari. I'm excited to have you here for season 2 of Actionables. You've been on here before, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
Yes, I also look forward. It's one of my favorite topics.
Great. Okay. So let's get into it, Hari. For all of you who are watching, who are listening to Actionables, Hari and I go back. We have worked almost like a decade back in an organization, and that's how we first met each other. So, Hari, I want to start off the conversation today by focusing and talking about how you ventured into leadership coaching.
Sure. I have made many pivots in my career, and most of it has been very accidentally delightful pivots. We first met during my first job. That was completely unexpected. I was an art student. I was a student of literature, and technology world was so far apart for me. But it was a very intuitive leap of faith that landed me there. And after about a decade in the online advertising marketing space, I started realizing more and more that my calling is working with people. But at that time, because the professional experiences in the domain of marketing, online tech, and everything, I didn't know how to make a switch. Should I be studying something or should I be doing something on the side as a hustle? Um, but what did happen in between was there was this one phase when I took a small sabbatical from work to pursue a childhood dream to be a civil servant. So I was preparing for IAS. It didn't happen. So I re-entered the corporate world. But one thing which was very clear to me was the kind of timings we have in the modern corporate setup, especially for somebody working out of India with late night and everything was not working for me. So it started taking a toll on my health, and I looked out for some way to maintain my health, which took me to first yoga. So I got introduced to yoga in the tradition of Sri T. Krishnamacharya and Deshikachar, which is all about adapting a practice for the individual. When I started learning and going deeper into that world, primarily through my teachers from Yoga Vahini, it's an organization based in Chennai, founded by Saraswati Vasudevan, I figured there's a lot of in-depth psychology involved in the foundational philosophy of yoga, which is Yoga Sutras. So I got a lot of interest in Yoga Sutra. I started studying that more deeply with my teachers and colleagues. And that was the time I had just moved from Hyderabad to Bangalore to join Amazon. And I realized because my learning of yoga took me more deeper into teacher training of yoga, which was a 2-year program, gradual study. And as I got opportunity to do work with people, I realized this is something I feel more in alignment with who I am. So there was this one pull developing towards working with people. That was one element of it. Then there was a push factor. Growingly, I realized that the leadership models in the current corporate setup was something which was very dehumanizing. There were a couple of particularly unpleasant events which happened, which made me realize that we are looking at people as resources. And that was deeply dehumanizing. Even now, and this was what I felt about in 2015. So imagine right now with AI, it's even more pronounced. But at that time, it was more subtler. And I felt that this was not sitting well with me. And I deeply believe that there must be a different way in which you can treat people, you can build organizations and everything. But for me, first, it was like I have to take care of my health, my well being. So I took a leap of faith to start something called Yogashala, which is primarily I was doing a lot of work with yoga, teaching retreats. I think I spoke about it in my last
Yes.
episode with you. But during that time, when I made this switch, I also happened to meet some amazing mentors who integrated yoga philosophy and having a more holistic view of who a person is with leadership development. So my work with them, there were many of them, my work with them helped me to realize that, oh, there is a possibility that these two fields, which I'm very deeply passionate about, working with people and working with Indian philosophical traditions, knowledge systems, can come together in a meaningful way in the modern leadership context and corporate context. So my work started taking shape to what it is now into two clear streams. One focused more on well-being, which is around therapy, trauma healing, and the other part, which being with organizations, with teams around helping them reimagine how leadership can look like, how being a leader can look like, and even looking at themselves, the organization, and the context in a way that is very meaningful and energizing. I would say these were the push-pull factors that took me from being a corporate employee to, so the first pivot was to fully into a well-being space, and now the current stage I'm in is where I am working with leaders and organizations on how do you integrate these two aspects? How do you cultivate a leadership style and culture which has well-being at its core? So that's where I'm now.
Hari, it's always inspiring to hear how you started, and you so beautifully spoke about the push and pull factors of how it inspired you to get into this field and to do the work that you're doing. Before we get into the core of today's conversation, where we are going to be talking about Indian philosophical traditions that you mentioned, I want to go back to what you briefly mentioned, that you met mentors at that point in time when you were making the decision to switch from corporate and to get into this field of work. I want to know, how important is the role of mentors? Because a lot of people who are listening or watching this podcast may be on the fence right now of to do something creative or to go after something, doing anything new, or role of mentors or like-minded people you believe play a role.
No, I think the two things that you mentioned, mentors and like-minded people, I like to call that second part as a sangha or a community of practitioners. I feel both have played a very pivotal role for me. Even before the corporate stage, if I look back at the choice I made to move to literature in college after a science background, I had to give credit to my mentors from my school days who were, so I was part of this youth wing of Chinmaya mission called Chinmaya Yuva Kendra, which was where we had a weekly study class on Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta. We used to run workshops for youth based on these through very exciting ways, using theater, arts. A lot of that mentorship really helped me to formulate some of my fundamental ways of looking at work. So there was a very beautiful statement from, I think, one of the Upanishads, which I still recall. As a child, I learned it in Chinmaya, that Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitayacha. So it was an attitude to work. Atmana Mokshartham, for the self-realization and for the hita of the world, for the well-being of the world. How can you align these two simultaneously? That is how it's an aspiration. Okay. So this was embedded into me as a child. And I could feel that even the dissatisfaction I was feeling while working with technology was because I could not find that meaning. I could not find that alignment at one level. So if I look back, what prompted me to leave a well-paying job in the tech field, it was partly the seed implanted by one mentor long back about, can this be an aspiration? Can you align your own self-transformation with the well-being of the world? And I think, so that became an inquiry, a search. But if I go to the stage when I left the corporate world, definitely the mentors I met, because they have done their decades of work in this field, building on previous mentors they had. And some of them are pioneers in the field of applied behavioral science. So I think in our Indian tradition, we always honor the Guru Parampara. There is a tradition. It's not that we don't say we stand on the shoulders of giants. We are at the feet of the uh, mentor of the Guru. So there is a certain, I like to call it a pravaham or a stream of grace and learning we get passed through mentors in any field. And when we are able to receive it, we receive it to the ability and the capacity we might have at that point. So I don't believe I may have imbibed everything that my mentors may have aspired to give me, but I received what I could, and I'm building on it, and I'm improvising on it, adding my own elements to it. And there's this one very beautiful statement at one point in my yoga teacher training practice. My teacher said, I know what I'm teaching, but I don't know what you're learning to the group. Because she said, because what you learn will be based on where you are in your life. Where I am teaching from is where I am in my life. I think for me, that is a very memorable thing to remember, even as a coach. Okay, I might uh, create whatever conditions, but everybody receives and unfolds at their own pace. So, one, yes, mentors extremely important, especially if you're looking at a craft like facilitation, coaching, or any other field. You need that. At the same time, I would also say that the main thing is also to create peerhood with community of practitioners. Oftentimes, the mentoring or the mentorship can also come with a lot of power dynamics. When do you, how do you play the dance of leadership and followership? This is a beautiful question in flow game, one of the modalities I work with. And I always go back to that. So I think being a mentee is an act of followership. But how do you also draw the line where you know this is when I need to stand up, I need to step up, and then you have your community of practitioners. And I think that's a very beautiful possibility for anybody to invest in, because that is the space where we have a lot of complexities. Because as a peer, I have to engage with, when I meet somebody who is also a fellow coach, building a meaningful collaboration involves a lot of effort. Engaging with our own insecurities, shadows, maybe envy, all this, having difficult conversations about different things. I think both these are very important areas of growth as a person, because otherwise it's easy to just do your own thing in an isolated fashion. I have done that a lot, and I had had my phases of collaboration, then feeling that, oh, I can't collaborate, I'll just do my own thing. Then again, learning from the experiences and building and investing in communities of practitioners. I think so both the aspects you mentioned are really important when we explore a field, for it to be sustainable in the sense of growing as a person in that craft. Otherwise, we will just get a certification and we might be just stagnate. Yeah.
Yeah. I enjoyed what you said just now, Hari, about the peerhood, because I think I can relate. I think we've had this conversation several times before, that since we are doing something very different from the corporate world, and to be able to build your own business or to do anything creative, you have those times where you feel like, okay, should I just do it alone? And where does the spirit of collaboration come into picture? And I especially liked what you said about to deal with your own shadows, because I think for the longest time that was a theme for me, where I thought, okay, I don't need anybody else, I'll just do it on my own. And then to deal with the envy, and then to collaborate, how do you be open and how do you look at it from a collaborative spirit, is very, very difficult when we are first starting out. So was that a challenge for you as well, where you did mention that you had to do it couple of times on your own and then be open to it? But could you briefly talk to me about how important it is to be open when you are because it doesn't come naturally. I'll be the first person to say that it didn't come naturally to me. I am somebody who has taken a long time to be open to the idea of collaborating with somebody, because I used to look at other as the competition, and I used to always think like, oh, I have to do better or I have to one up. And it has taken years to come to this realization now that competition is short lived. So, could you talk to me about your thoughts about that, Hari, before we jump into the main topic for today's conversation?
Definitely. For me, it also depends how we look at these ideas of competition and collaboration. Okay. I remember this one statement I heard long back. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go long distance, you go together. So I think there are times and phases where we want to go fast out of our life context and necessity. When I started off, uh, as I said, I started off in this track after almost a decade in a completely different field. So when I started, like I think we started around the same time, a lot of our friends and colleagues were all established in different places. So this sense of urgency for me, I need to ramp up. But this is not that kind of a field, right? The more you practice is when you grow as a coach or a facilitator. So for me, the process was because I am fundamentally somebody who likes connecting multiple fields, I took a decision to go solo so that I can free up my time and space to go deep in multiple fields. So I chose yoga as one, leadership and coaching as another. So being on my own, not being responsible for a team or anything, allowed me to go fast and deep into multiple things and to freely experiment without having any overheads to worry about that, oh, if I goof up here, I might end up creating a loss for another person. So I think that freedom really helped me. Then I was part of certain voluntary communities, organizations, including my mentors organization, where we worked a lot with Yoga Sutras, Mahabharata, and all this, where there were differential interests. Somewhere it's a very diverse group. Some love to offer things from a spirit of service, and some wanted to make a living out of it. I was one of those people who wanted to do it very professionally, focusing on livelihood, because I always, going back to Atmana Mokshartha, I think for me, okay, how do I align my dharma and artha both together at the same time was very critical for me. So being part of that kind of a diverse group brought both gifts of collaboration, learning to discover the edges of my personality, engagement with groups. So some people envied and loved my speed. Others felt intimidated, threatened. There were a lot of times where I could lose my cool very easily. So oftentimes some people who like to go slow felt that I'm being like a bull in the china shop, fast tracking everything. We don't want to do so many things, all that. But there were others who appreciated it deeply. So after a lot of experimentation, I figured that, oh, I am at the stage where, because I've gone deep and wide at the same time, and also I started learning other modalities like Lego serious play, flow game. For me, it was almost like there's a lot of curiosity of how do we interconnect these things. And so I felt I needed a larger canvas. So I again flipped back to being solo. So I started my company, the Zensei Leadership. And so there was this phase 2 years ago where I just started doing things, experimenting creatively. Once I could feel that integration in me, then I could now I'm in a phase of collaboration. So, but this time I'm also able, this integration has helped me to know who are the kind of collaborators I want with me. And that clarity has created a larger canvas. So now I collaborate a lot with facilities from Europe, Latin America, across India, and from different fields. So I think my own sense of integration got reflected in the kind of shifts I made outwardly. And I think this is something we may have to keep doing, asking, being self-reflective, tuning in, and then going out. There's no one mode of collaboration, I feel. So I think sometimes we need to just step back and reflect on what am I really doing, and then decide on a choice, which may be similar, which may be very different.
Right. That's wonderful, Hari. I think this is a perfect segue to get into the meat of today's podcast, which I'm very, very kicked and curious to talk to you about. So for everybody who's watching or listening to this, we are going to go ahead and talk to Hari about what is the role of traditional epics such as Mahabharata and Ramayana in today's leadership force and the work that you do. So, Hari, could you start off by first mentioning we are going to be jumping into archetypes? We're going to be talking about what are archetypes, first of all. So, to set the context as to what are these archetypes according to Mahabharata.
Okay. These archetypes belong to epics. Now, epics contain what is today called in most of our English literature as mythology. But myth is different because when you hear the word myth, usually we feel something that, oh, that's a myth, urban legend, which means it's something false. Problem of using that word. So the word in Greek is mythos, which has a very different connotation. And in Indian vocabulary, it is Purana in Sanskrit. So Purana means Pura Api Navam. Pura means ancient. Api Navam means yet new. So the question is, how can something be very ancient and yet new? There comes the archetype. So all the Puranas, if we have Vishnu Purana, Shiva Purana, then this, that. So everything, if you read these Puranas, which people call as mythology, you have this very grand setting. There is gods, there are demons, there are fights, there are kings, a lot of very colorful things happening. How can they be ancient yet new? Ancient in a sense because it is set in an ancient time and context. New because it has a relevance in the here and now for each of us. How? So there are many scholars of these epics, both in India and abroad, who have said they can be read at different levels. Either you can read it as a history, in which case you end up in arguments whether this really happened here or there or things like that, or as a fiction, or you can look at it as a mirror. So for me, mythology or Purana as a mirror has been my key journey with my mentors and with myself right from childhood. Archetypes, to answer your question, is essential energy of a certain kind that is residing in us, which is universal. So there are many archetypes, but the way each of us hold a certain archetypal energy in us will vary based on our life context, how we grew up. And one often confuses an archetype with a stereotype. To give you a very simple example, imagine when I say the name of Bhima, what is the image that you get in your mind?
Somebody who's strong.
Somebody who's strong, maybe very muscular. And so that focus on that externality of a form becomes a stereotyping. Like if you say, I come from Kerala, so there is a very famous king from mythology called Mahabali. So if you Google Mahabali, you will see somebody with a very big paunch and this. So that's a stereotype characterization of this character. Archetype means, what does this energy represent in me? That essential energy. For example, Bhima represents the archetypal energy of somebody who is deeply connected to their own desires, passions, who can go to any length if they are evoked or provoked into their emotionality. So if you look at Mahabharata, Draupadi, Bhima's wife, says while in the forest that, oh, I wish I had that flower, Kalyana Sauganthiyo. She has 5 husbands. He doesn't think you will get it. And he's on the journey to get it from some far off land. So he is somebody so he represents that archetypal energy in us, which doesn't look at whether there is a structure, whether there is a rule for something. This is something I want to pursue. I'm going to get it done. So in a leadership context, we can say this is the kind of archetypal energy that most of the successful startup founders will carry, because they may be completely thrilled, excited to operate when there is no office, no set rules, but you are comfortable to be on the roll, create things on the go. It has its shadows also. People can end up perceiving such a person as either charming or extremely intimidating or self-centered, or somebody that's he's a go-getter. So they can be very polarizing in the way they get perceived. So these are some of the ways in which that archetype can manifest. In our leadership work, we say that when we help leaders discover what are their archetypal energies, and you're not one archetype, you have a combination of these energies. How do they interplay with each other? And how do they move between the spectrum of being dysfunctional to functional to be in their heroic possibility? And that's the journey that we help leaders traverse. First, to understand where am I with respect to these, how do they interplay? And once they get a sense of it, identifying areas of growth based on the direction they want to achieve in their organization or role.
So, Hari, I heard you say the archetypal energy that like a leader could have multiple. So, what is the dominant, or is there a way to find the dominant archetypal energy in somebody? Because if they are going to have, like, say, multiple archetypes, energy within themselves, so is there a way to find out what is your dominant archetype?
Yep, there is. So I would also like to, at this point, acknowledge that this is not something I have created or anything. I have heard from my mentors that this way of looking at Mahabharata and in the context of personal archetypes was first proposed by Professor Pulin K. Garg in IIM Ahmedabad. He was the pioneer of applied behavioral science in India, and he taught it to a group of his disciples at that time, 3 of whom are also my mentors. So one is Raghu Anant Narayanan, who has written a very amazing couple of books on this. One is called The Leadership Dharma, and another is called The 5 Seats of Power. So I would highly recommend that to anybody listening if they were interested. He has built on some of the models that Professor Pulin has created around looking at Mahabharata archetypes in a more elaborate, more nuanced way. And another person who also has influenced me is Professor Indira Parikh. Professor Indira Parikh was the first woman and Dean of IIM Ahmedabad, and I was a serving professor there for was about 3 decades, founder director of Flame University. So she has also written a beautiful book based on this called The Mystery and Magic of Storytelling, where she has integrated her learnings with Professor Pulin on how do you work with this. So answer your question, how do we figure out what is the dominant archetypes? One is to start noticing what are the different ways in which I default into when there is a challenge. So if I can very quickly and briefly share what are these 5 archetypal energies as I learned it with my mentors. One is, so these are primarily based on the archetypes of the Mahabharata princes. So the eldest of whom is Yudhishthira. So the moment you think of Yudhishthira, you have a sense of somebody who is also called the Dharmaraja. So he is always preoccupied with what is right. So he represents the power of order and structure. So when a leader has the capacity to bring order, maintain status quo, ensure predictability, build SOPs, that is the functional utility of this propensity of the Yudhishthira energy in them. Yudhishthira is the person Krishna tells on the 18th day of the Mahabharata war to lead the army. Until then, he was not asked because he represents the energy which can enter a chaotic state and bring stability. So the dysfunctionality or the shadow side of the same person could be getting too caught up with rules. So the beauty of Mahabharata is there are these counterpoints within the Mahabharata itself. So if you look at a character like Bhishma, he's the most respected final authority of everything, widely regarded and respected by both sides, Pandavas and Kauravas. But he's too caught up with his own rule that I will never claim power. So even when something very atharmic or wrong was happening in the court, he did not raise his voice. So he ended up siding with the side that was representing more of the atharmic side. So that is a dysfunctional part of the same archetype. So they are counterpoints in a way. Similarly, Bhima, I already shared about the passion, the initiative, has a counterpoint in Duryodhana. Equally strong like Bhima, both of them learned from the same mentor Balarama, but very dysfunctional use of his energy. Similarly, you have a character like Nakula. Nakula is, you see references all over Mahabharata, but you don't see too many stories except in folk literature about him. He seemed to have been very beautiful and he was always serving the others. So he was there in the stables, cleaning the swords or maintaining the horses. So in a way, he represents the energy of somebody who can be completely fine being the backstage, away from the limelight, but creating context for others to perform. All the infrastructure holders, or what we call in modern leadership theories a servant leadership, like the Gandhian forms, represent the Nakula's energy. Now, the same person, if you look, there are counterpoints to this kind of a serving mentality. If you look at Gandhari, the wife of Dhritarashtra, the king was already blind. She also blinded herself out of the need to express support. But in the end, it did not serve the context because she could have actually complemented his blindness through her eyes. Right? So while you can also read it as extremely self-sacrificing, it was a dysfunctional expression of that same energy, ability to sacrifice the self. But Bhima, if you look at it, it's like, okay, I want this, I'm going out for this kind of loving the limelight. So they are different energies, but extremely essential when you build an organization. All the R&D kind of people who are excelling in this kind of a field are people who are having a very high degree of patience, rigor when it comes to knowledge. They're extremely curious. They can deep dive into a field, go to the ends, and just for knowledge sake. They have their own shadows. When do you act out? Because you might end up being a perfectionist, really getting into analysis paralysis, all those things. And you have a counterpoint of that also in Mahabharata in Shakuni. Extremely smart guy, but unlike Satyava, he is able to manipulate his ability to work with that knowledge of the dice to get things done. Then you have Arjuna. Arjuna represents a very unique Indian archetype of the ability to look at multiplicity of possibility, a double bind. So what we call as dharma sankatas or dilemmas. Oh, if I do this, I'm damned. If I do that, I'm damned. What do I do? How do you stay with this tension? And that is very beautifully represented at the start of the Kurukshetra war, when Arjuna asks Krishna to bring the chariot to the center of the field, where he can see both sides at the same time. The moment he says that, the entire system collapses. In somatic experiencing method, we call it the freeze, and the collapse happens. And Krishna represents that energy or the inner voice that you can access when you touch the Arjuna space, because when you engage with this tension, polarities, and you're able to stay with the heat of that intensity, you can touch the deeper intelligence, which is the archetype archetypal representation through Krishna's voice and the Bhagavad Gita. The entire epic is a beautiful depiction of the human condition, human dilemma, and all possible sorts of complexities of the human mind is beautifully captured metaphorically in this particular epic. So how does it become alive, a Purana? Because the more I can see this from a self-reflective mind, when I read a story, I'll be able to see, oh, this is me, that is me. And I have worked with the stories with children also. I think children far easily more owns up to their Duryodhana hood or Shakuni hood than I remember this one moment where one school invited me to work with their children, and we had one story about the poisoning of Bhima to put him at Duryodhana tried to poison Bhima to put him in the river as a kid. And the kids read the story and they said, I am not Duryodhana, and then very proud. So, but it is so fascinating because I think it's the shadow. But how do you work with your shadows? And it's so easy at that age to really see that, oh, this is part of me which can be so envious and I can beat this guy down, be a bully and all that stuff. So yeah, so to understand how which is the dominant, I think when we start reading this through this lens, I will start seeing where am I feeling more drawn to? Whom am I identifying more? Where do I feel more averse about? So I can also see what am I identifying, what am I disowning. Both are a good area of learning. It's fascinating the way that you have been explaining the archetypes, Hari. At least most of the people, myself including, were so programmed or conditioned to read Mahabharata just as a story, or like what we started off the segment by as a mythology, rather than looking at it from something that we can learn and, base our archetypes that we just discussed. So what would you say to somebody who already knows about Mahabharata but wants to start associating or deep diving into understanding the archetypes more clearly? So where should they or how should they start? I think I will pick on one way you framed it, just story. It is not just story. I think that's a good starting point because because this also represents one of the difficulties when we work with this with many leadership contests, because people tend to think, oh, leadership means it should be so serious. And one of the models I work with is serious play, Lego serious play, right? So I deeply believe you need to enter a playful state, because in the playful state, you can access a deeper intelligence, a more intuitive wisdom. And if you look at all our learning processes in India, stories was a very critical component. We even have an Upanishad called Kathopanishad. And any Upanishadic literature you take, it's about some stories. But there are many, many different kinds of stories. Panchatantra is a classic case of using stories for public administration for the king's children. Even in Mahabharata, the key difference between the Pandavas who discovered their heroic possibility and the Kauravas is when the Pandava princes made a mistake, and they made many mistakes. For example, going into the dice, they took time to self-reflect, withdraw. And what did they do at that time? If you look at their Vanavas time after the going into the forest, it is also a metaphor of withdrawing from the familiar context. They went to learned people, sages, and the sages kept telling them stories of other people who did similar mistakes. And the stories educated them. How do they take the next step? So I think one of the important things for me to invite listeners is to relook at how do I look at a story? Do I look at it just as a story? Or can I look at the story from a reflective mind so that the story can mirror back to me something in me? That is the first step. And the moment you cultivate the reflective mindset, the story becomes a mirror. That is beautiful, Hari, what you just said, because I don't think most of us do that very naturally. I think we are programmed or we are conditioned to read it like as a folklore or as a myth. And I like what you said about if we can use it to introspect and see something, what is it bringing up in me? So why do you think that is from your standpoint, Hari, that we don't want to look at some uncomfortable parts in us or the shadow self? And you mentioned just now, you gave the example of how children are more open to seeing that Duryodhan side to them, right? As adults, we want to shy away from it. I certainly want to shy away from it at times where something comes up, somebody says, I says something to me, I get triggered. I want to hide that side. I want to protect that ego side of me. So what do you think, according to you, why do we do that? It's a very deep question. What I would attempt to say is in the form of a practice I have come across, which seems to be drawn from African tradition. In some of my process work spaces, which I'm part of, like in Sumeta, we've done one process where, which is inspired by an African practice of when a person commits a wrong in a village, they say at the corner of the village there is a well. The whole village takes this person to that well and they stand around the well and they start telling what are the good things they have seen in this person. And this person offers to the well whatever he wants to offer and let go. And once this process is complete, they come back to the village. I think maybe this is one part, one way of what we call as restorative justice, not punishing kind of in the jail time. But what normally happens in our social conditioning, I feel, is a child is able to express freely. As the child grows, it discovers that not every expression is permitted. Some will be punitive. I can get punished. So if a person grows up in a context where being angry or expressing anger will be met with a punishment, and this goes to the Nati Shastra and Navarasa theory, when one rasa or an emotion gets suppressed, it gets substituted. So many people who end up doing a lot of road rage or extremely sarcastic as a primary way of expression of disagreement, if you look at their context growing up or at some other point, then they found it difficult to really express the raw rage. So this becomes a coping mechanism. Some humor will replace, but because it has that tinge of anger, it becomes sarcasm. Or because this energy can't go anywhere, when they meet a dog on the street, finds expression there. So we start disowning parts of us because encountering them will be fearful from the perspective of either getting punished outwardly or after a while you introject that criticism onto yourself. So this becomes like a like in Yoga Sutra we speak about a process of abhinivesha, a strong sense of self identity. It's like a defense mechanism in modernity. Now anything that can break this will be extremely reactively engaged with. So if I grew up thinking that I am a nice boy, will never be angry with anybody, the moment this has a possibility of breaking, where I find an expression of anger, either I will extremely feel bad about it, I will thrash myself down, or somebody else will do that for me, or I will find. So what happens is I start disowning this part of me. So if I read a very angry Bhima, I will not be able to appreciate or that passion. I will be feeling this is too much, self-centered guy. That's the judgment I might end up passing. This is also what is very beautifully, if you look at every relationship as a mirror, if I look at what am I disliking in the other, it can really point to what am I disowning in me. And then that becomes the process of self-discovery and how do you integrate. So each of these characters in Mahabharata, if you look at the 1 year of Vanvas and Atnatavas at the end, is a real metaphor for the shadow work they did. So when each of them chose who they will become for that 1 year, Yudhishthira said, yeah, I have been too caught up with all these rules, rightness, this, that. And what ended up happening? Ended up happening was I did not honor my own compulsions and desires. So it went on suppressing. And then opportunity to play a dice game, nothing could stop. Even though I could see that the guy is going to manipulate me, nothing could stop me from committing to it. So I lost choice in that moment. So he said, I am going to be the gambler companion to the king. So I can honor this part of me and allow it. Hima decided, I've been so indulgent of my desires, I'm going to be the chef. So he indulged in cooking delicious things and everything. So 1 year of just engaging with that part of themselves. So each of them, if you look at what they chose in that 1 year, also represent the kind of Arjuna, saying that I was being too masculine and I want to explore the softer part of it. So took up the feminine dance, female dancer form, integration of masculine and feminine energies. So it's a beautiful depiction of how each of them took time first to move out of familiar context, look deep, and then choose to work with the most difficult part of themselves in isolation. So, and that opens the context for a heroic expression after that.
Right. So it is very important, like you said, to be able to introspect the archetypes. So it's not just enough to read about archetypes and say, okay, so I associate more with a Bhima or with a Yudhishthira, because I think the danger in just doing that or just correlating to the archetypal energy without taking the onus and the accountability of, okay, can I also see if I am being dysfunctional with this archetype is very, very important. So, what would you say, like going back to the question that I asked you, if somebody is just getting to understand these archetypes right now and is looking and rereading Mahabharata completely, not just as a story, where should they start and how should they go about it?
So, one thing I would recommend is if you're just looking at wanting to read the story, choose a version of Mahabharata that is relatively undiluted or undistorted. Because there are so many Mahabharata related stories coming up these days, which has personal opinion of the author. I come from Kerala, so it's a very famous for a beautiful novel by M.T. Vasudevan Nair called Randamula, which is about Bhima's view of Mahabharata. But it has a lot of opinion of the author. So I would say first starting point will be to have a very leisurely reading of a genuinely undiluted version of the text, which I would recommend the version by Kamala Subramaniam, which is very simple to read. At the same time, it's not too heavy, too big. She has written on both Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Bhagavatam. So that is one way, simple way to start. Beyond that, if you want to look at it from a personal, self-reflective context, I would say just reach out to people like me who might be or my mentors who are working in this field where we have integrated some of the the way we work with it is we use theater a lot. So in my case, I started working with applied theater and arts. Well, because when you think, it will bypass a lot of, and you'll end up engaging with your defenses. So you may not touch your blind spot. So theater is a very beautiful way of engaging somatically, where your body knows how to relate to something far more than your brain. So using theater, we create evocations or provocations that help you suddenly discover, oh, this is what happened to me. Then we sit back and reflect on it. I have also integrated my work with Mahabharata archetypes with Lego serious play, where we use Lego bricks in the serious play method. Serious play method, we have very simple principle. You build first, think second, talk last. So you don't give time for the cognitive cortico brain to step in, but you work with the bricks to create metaphors and archetypes with your hands. And then you start reflecting on it. So already your body intelligence has gone into the built model. So then you work with it. So I think some of these embodied practices will help you to discover the shadows and the other nuances of the archetype better. The general idea of archetype, if you read the story in a reflective mind, you will get it. But if you're a leader and you want to work more deeply with it, a few of us are trained by one of the organizations we learned from Tao Leadership Academy, where we got certified in doing a diagnostic test of sort, where you can map your archetypal propensity. Where is it now? Where is it moving or tending to move towards? And how do you see others based on this? And the juxtaposition of this gives a good nuanced view of your learning growth journey.
Yes, now since you brought that up, Hari, we should definitely. I'm very curious to know about my diagnosis, so I think I
Yes,
will put this
yes. If
ready.
you can pull up your score, maybe we can have a very quick run of.
And then once we are done discussing this, maybe you can give the viewers and
Sure.
listeners a gist of what or how they can find a diagnosis and how you can help
Yes,
them do the same.
definitely.
All right.
We can
Okay.
share this.
So I'm sharing my
Okay.
score.
This is Paden, your Pandava score sheet. So just so everybody knows what it represents, the bottom axis shows Yudhishthira represented by Y, Bhima with B, Nakula with N, Sahadeva with S, Arjuna with A. And Yudhishthira represents the power of order and structure. Bhima, power of passion, initiative. Nakula represents the power of compassion and service. Sahadeva represents the power of knowledge and curiosity. And Arjuna represents the power to hold polarities, double binds, dilemmas. And you can see three lines in this graph. The first blue line represents SC, which is your current self. The red line is where you want to move towards, your aspirational self. And the purple is how you view others through this lens. Okay. And what strikes me most, Paden, is your highest is Sahadeva followed by Nakula, which means your propensity to engage with a challenge will be, you will default into, can I learn more about this before I respond? Let me deep dive into this subject. And for all you know, you might just keep going down the rabbit hole and just enjoy the process of learning. And often you may have to remind yourself, oh, now I need to act on this.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
so accurate. Yes.
And if you look at the Sahadeva score, you will see yourself quite distinct from others. And there is a need you are feeling right now, perhaps to tone down your learning agenda, because you may have felt, okay, I've done this quite long. Let me be more like how much others are doing and come down. So that red dot shows how much you want to dip, lower that investment of time or in the learning space. Nakula is your second best, which is about service, compassion. So maybe, of course, it's natural. You're also in the coaching line. So as a coach, you might be quite natural at being empathetic and holding space for others, tuning into what others needs, feels. all that. And I don't see you wanting to make much of a change there. It's almost where you are and where you want to be staying same. Where I see, and you have a healthy regard for rules, systems, SOPs, standard operating procedures. Your
Yeah.
Yudhishthira score is relatively moderate to high kind of a thing.
My
And you
need
see,
structure is very
yeah,
high.
your need for structure. You want it predictable. You want it as a sort of a system. What is where you see least identify yourself is the Bhima, honoring your own passions, desires, maybe going out there and being in the limelight and speaking about your work and building a company. I think these are things which becomes very challenging, not a natural thing for you.
I
And
like
you
to be more in the background and
yeah,
not in somebody's face. And yeah,
correct. So that's what the Napila Bhima distance represents. So, but you see others as being better off than you in this way, in the Bhima propensity. So
yes.
there's a slight wanting or a wish to better your Bhima energy, cultivate it a little bit more, but again, not too much. You still want to, you are quite okay being at that level. So you want to improve, but not too much. You don't want to be like others in that regard. So overall, I feel you are maintaining a very positive regard of your distinctiveness right now with some very clear indications of where you want to be more like others.
Oh, this is fascinating, Hari. So okay, I'm going to stop sharing this right now. But this you have given me such a good idea of where I am with my leadership skills. So now to anybody who's listening this, how can they get in touch with you, Hari, if they want to identify their archetypes and how they can potentially work with you and increase their leadership skills?
Sure. So again, just a disclaimer: this whatever you saw, the graph, diagnostic test, all this is licensed by entity called Reflexive Lens Consulting, and I'm I'm licensed to use it because I'm trained in this. So if anybody is interested to work with this, we do have a very detailed report that we can provide for the clients who work with this. You can reach out to me on my email, or I can also share a link with you, Paden, which maybe you can give it in the podcast where there's a lot more details of how this can be applied in different contexts. And they just need to fill up the form on that page and reach out to me.
Okay, great. This has been a lovely and fantastic conversation, Hari. I have enjoyed every bit of it, learning from you, and it's always inspiring and to have a conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Hari. Any last words before you go and you sign off from the podcast for today?
One, thank you for inviting me because, as you know, there are multiple fields where I invest my energies, and this is something very close to my heart. Working with Indian mythology, epics, because even as a child, I got introduced to Puranas through my grandmother, and my first exposure to working with this in a self-reflective manner was through my mentors in Chinmaya and everything. So I think, in a way, I think every time I come back to this topic and I work with leaders, it's also a reminder for me to a reminder of me to trust the inclinations that you cultivate as a child. Because I was very fascinated. I had a stocks of Amar Chitradas at home, and then I used to be too into theater with all the Purana stories and everything in my school days. But I think if you really invest your Shraddha into any field, I think it has a beautiful way of unfolding in a way that is relevant and meaningful to you. So I think my closing statement will be a very beautiful quote from Joseph Campbell around mythology, around myths. He has said that the myth is the dream of the collective, and the dream is the myth of the individual. So the more we discover the myth of our land, we are also tapping into what was the collective dream of this civilization, any civilization, whoever is listening to this. And the more we look into our own dreams, which is what we help as coaches with our work, we also help individuals discover what is the mythology they are living out. What myths are they holding? And when I discover my personal myth, and then I know how to look at the myth of what I'm reading, I think it's a beautiful way in which they can dance together and help us unfold into our best versions.
That's beautiful, Hari. Thank you so much again for being on Actionables. Love our conversation for today, and every time it's lovely chatting with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
And that does it for this episode. If you'd like to get in touch with Hari or myself, the links for that are mentioned in the description of this episode, wherever you're watching or listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will meet you in the next episode.
Till then, I hope you remember that you matter, your goals matter, and it's really up to you to make them happen. Take good care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.